So, Vish, thank you for joining me for this first episode of the GTM Rewired podcast. We are going to have a great conversation, I'm sure, but also experiment some things and try to challenge some ideas here. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Vish, before we dive into this big idea that we want to share, maybe a quick intro of you for the audience. We met last year at Sculpt the Clay event, so of course it will be related to what Clay can do in the GTM automation world. You had already had strong ideas back in the day, so we can talk about that a little, but please can you introduce yourself, where you
Yeah.
come from and what you do right now?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm Vish. I really started off as a confused post grad where I had gotten a degree in psychology and business and kind of quickly learned that business is where I wanted to be. And I kind of shuffled around those early career times. I tried a little bit of everything. I was in events for a few years, social media, demand gen. And then I kind of learned that I had a lot of marketing data, had no idea what to do with it. And I started talking to people that were older and wiser than me. And they kind of advised me, hey, why don't you learn SQL? So tried that for a bit and realized I had no aptitude to teach that to myself. So went back to school, got a degree in data analytics, which was the sexy new name for statistics at the time. And then pivoted my career more to be operational and data oriented. And I haven't looked back. It's funny you bring up that conference because I had just come back from mat leave and I felt like I took my mat leave at the peak of this AI wave. So on my mat leave, I was playing around with a lot of different tools. I come back to this world and I find that every single vendor I work with has slapped an AI solution on top of their product. I'm like, this is nonsense. And then my sales team is telling me, we don't want to keep using 20 different tools. So I think I was telling you, like, this is just crazy. Like, why isn't everything just connected to one superbot? And then lo and behold, MCP has come out and developed, and we're kind of like seeing that sort of thing now.
Yeah, you were in advance actually, because it was not even a thing, those connections, as you said. And I remember a conversation I was very excited about like Clay and everything. And you were like, yeah, but my sales team, they want to have one thing. And I was like, okay, that's indeed interesting. and here we are a year later and almost a year later. And it's starting looking like this. So you had the right vision, apparently.
Yeah, I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but it's what made sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can see it now very clearly. So that's really cool. So you have a marketing background and you went from this specifically to the more nerdy world that is the data analyst part of the job, which I personally enjoy a lot. And now we are moving this to the next step, which is connecting all of this, using this data to serve it to the final user, which is very exciting. And which leads us to the big idea of this episode. Where is the place for the human and where is the place for the AI in this new world where the ops, and you have this ops background, is automated more and more. So that will be the topic for today. And while preparing this and exchanging a little with you, I had one of my AI brainstorming agents that came up with something, and we can use this image, which I think is interesting, the barbell image. So the barbell image would be, in this barbell, you have two weights where humans matter. And this is upstream and downstream to anything you want to operate. Upstream, you have the need for a human, which would be the strategy, the taste, the experience as well. And in the end, downstream, you would have the taste again, and also using this output, criticizing it, refining it as well, being the human in the loop, and finally use this in a human interaction in the end. So the barbell image was pretty cool. So we can use that for this episode. And we'll love to hear what you think and how this works for you in your mind.
Yeah, so I like the idea of a barbell, and you kind of have like that straight line part and the humans at each end. And so, like, that makes sense to me from a couple different lens, right? When you do a workflow, very like tactical step, right, to initiate an action until you've gotten everything agentic, which I personally have not, right? You need the human to start the work, right? And define the work and what needs to get done. But no longer do you need that human to then go and do the analysis if you're asking it to do web scraping or something else, right? You just need to think through the process, initiate the process, and then the end result be like, hey, like this doesn't look good, or refine it. And since we were talking about Clay, I'll talk about this yesterday. I built out this flow in Clay, and then I told AI, picked a model and said, hey, go run and write this email. And then I looked at the email output. I'm like, oh God, this sounds like AI, like I need to tell it, remove the M dash and like have a human connection and don't mention the person's name this many times. So I'm definitely starting to see that barbell and like very tactical workflows. And then at a broader level too, I think, yeah, at least on the teams I'm on, there's definitely been a shift in viewing ourselves as people that manage a specific tool to thinking more broadly about what is the outcome that we're trying to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will dive into more depth with this idea, but we can see it already as well at my little agency level. We see it as well. Like we can't serve just an output like this, like do something and no, it doesn't work. Maybe one day, but not at the moment. To dive into this, and you mentioned Clay, and we can use that as a starting point. You have this background ops, you have a team. What's for you? How do you define and how do you see this new role that Clay basically invented, the GTM engineer? How this new concept for you fits organizations, and also how do they live with ops, like the traditional ops, the RevOps, the sales ops, the marketing ops, in your experience, and what's your vision on this?
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, I feel very lucky that I'm sitting on a revenue ops. I've sat in sales ops before. I've sat in marketing ops. And what really appealed to me about this role is my manager, she leads our team and she has grown up kind of at NVIDIA, which is where I'm at today, and she's seen the entire function develop and she's very AI forward. So I think that helps, right? And for me, a lot of the shift has become in terms of, okay, so traditionally, like in marketing ops for years and years, your expertise in HubSpot or Marketo really mattered. And understanding how those little things work together and being able to do them really mattered. Even something as simple as a list upload, there were so many nuances, cleansing the data, formatting the data, updating the data, right? And we built our entire careers. I have so many friends in marketing ops. We've gotten, Marketo certifications, people have become champions. And I think that world is coming to an end rapidly, right? And so now your expertise doesn't really work. And like for Clay, I think, they had started a certification program, then they ended it, realizing the tool was changing and the space was changing so fast. And I really agree with that approach. I think the older I get, the more certifications I've got under my belt. I'm like, this really doesn't matter. The best ops people I know really aren't so laser focused. And then GTM engineering, I think, is different. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for a podcast today. And I'm like, when I think of a go-to-market engineer, I actually don't think of someone who's very developed in any one area. I think it's somebody who thinks about things like, hey, like how can I connect these different processes and systems together to drive a specific business outcome? And you still need people who have spent their time understanding how a process should look. What are the friction points? What does the underlying data look like, right? So I think those are the strengths that ops can still bring to the table, is like really understanding their one specific use case, whether that's lead scoring, whether that's, sending out compelling emails, and working with the go-to-market engineer to make sure that those processes are engineered properly, right? But I do still think go-to-market requires a complete shift away from thinking about a very specific thing to a broad lens where you really are thinking from like an engineering lens of like, how can I connect systems? How can I remove problems and solve this problem? So I'm not 100% sure that every ops person will make it, but I think you either make that shift where you start thinking like a go-to-market engineer, or you figure out a way that maybe you can be more creative. Like if you were somebody who sat in marketing ops, instead of being like, okay, I'm going to get your campaign that you came up with out the door, you can instead, help your end user and be like, hey, I've noticed that you've been setting these campaigns. These are the ones that perform really well. And by the way, I used AI to go and research that the demographic you're going after really frequents this coffee shop. Next ABM campaign, maybe you send them something or host an event here, so like find a way to add value with the tools that you have at your disposal. And I think that's where I think there would be a valuable shift. Not sure, I can predict the whole market, but I think there's going to be a shift and it's already happening.
No, that's great. And I kind of share your vision. And if you said it, like those certifications, they were used to be a proof like, okay, this guy or this girl knows how to use this tool and this specific sub feature and stuff like that. But if we automate all of this now, okay, those skills are not useful anymore, not at this level anyway. And there are multiple ways to recycle yourself, maybe as an ops. And as you said, you can go on the creative side, like, okay, I have all this power of AI and automation at my disposal. How can I make my job and the output and the life of my colleagues and coworkers better by, as you said, going deeper into a campaign idea or whatever it can be? That would be the creative path. And the other path could be being a bit more technical, because as you said, if you want to automate something and optimize it, you still need to understand what's underneath and what's the micro detail that your automation should handle, at least when you set it up for your specific context. So you could, again, have this barbell example going one way or the other, but everything in the middle is kind of condemned to disappear. Would you agree with that as well, at this micro level, I would say?
Yeah, and I say this with a lot of sympathy as also somebody who, if I wasn't lucky enough to be hired by the right companies at the right time, I think this could have been a really challenging time for me. But yes, I think, being somebody who's just executed a campaign and I've, managed teams of people who just did this one very specific thing really well and with such grace with difficult stakeholders, right? But yeah, I don't think that world exists anymore where knowing a specific tool, being an expert in something that is like a technical tool is almost like, being an expert in Excel is kind of outdated. I think now being like a Marketo or a HubSpot is going to be outdated, especially if I go to some of these tools, I'm on their product advisory boards and things like that, and I see, oh, they're actually shifting to make that work super automated too. And I've asked the question like, hey, now what happens to those of us who spent our careers around this tool? They're like, well, hopefully you've grown up. And I'm like, yeah, but like, what about the new grads? So there's a lot of things I don't know. But yes, unfortunately, I do think that era has come to an end.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough. Of course, every revolution brings new opportunities, but also will probably create some dramas for people being left behind. Some might completely change their career, but I would understand someone being like, I've been 10 years in this tool and now they have an AI feature that does half what I was doing. That can be tough for sure. But yeah, I think that there are as many opportunities as doors closing at the same time. And it's kind of mandatory, because if we zoom out a little, not talking about just this AI automation of GTM, that also happened, as you said, with Excel. Like the first person using Excel in accounting or whatever was probably removing a lot of extra steps done by humans before. And now we are like, okay, that's the norm. And we still need those thousands of people in accounting to do whatever they do in accounting. So
Right.
it might take some time and some friction, of course, but after a few steps, we might get to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, that's basically the new norm. That's how we do things now. We don't spend time clicking into HubSpot or Clay. We do this and that.
Right.
And
Exactly.
with this vision in mind, and as you said, you have a team, how do you manage that? How do you make sure that your team is going in the right direction? Is it something you already have? I mean, you're not probably didn't figure it out completely, but is it already integrated into the way you work with your team?
Yeah, so I think we're still figuring it out. So the task that our manager gave us is kind of like figure out a way to use the tools at your disposal. So within NVIDIA, there's like a big push to know at least one of the AI vendors. We've selected a few, no like one specific one, but there's sessions, right? And you are expected as an employee of this corporation to go and train yourself on one of those, right? And then on top of that, you have our leadership telling us, hey, like within this, now you need to learn how to make skills, share out those skills with your stakeholders. So for me, there's been a lot of upskilling. I think now things have really developed. But before I was like, in my night times and I have a kid, I get them to bed and then I'm like trying to get out and figure out, okay, how do I install this on my computer? How do I figure all of this out? Now some of that has been templatized, but figuring out how do you install these things, then you need to get like your different tools. So we had to get the Salesforce MCP approved through security. Now I've installed that in my instance of Claude or Codex or whatever it is I'm deciding to use that day, right? And then we have our Databricks instance, and our Databricks team has gone and created an MCP that you connect. Then now, instead of telling my team, hey, go build me a Tableau dashboard, I have had to figure out, okay, what are the things I need to see? I'll make that, I'll go run that against, my data team, be like, hey, can you just like double check that I did this right? Then I'll go and make a cut of that data for an executive. And then I'm the person training my executives that I support. Hey, like go and like figure this out. Now, at a team level, like luckily, I'm not in a position where I have to get a bunch of people on board. I think that the job of my leaders is quite tough. But what I'm noticing is there is this shift that has to happen where we're all being told, hey, like you, in addition to your day to day responsibilities, are now responsible for making sure that people that interact with you can interact with your tool in MCP. So I'm rapidly working with all my vendors to get them into this MCP thing. And then I'm working with my end users, which right now is our AMs, our SDS teams, and some of our marketing teams that market to very specific groups, and being like, okay, so how are you looking at your data? How are you using Codex, Claude, Perplexity, whatever it is you're using, right? And I figure out their workflows, and then I work with my vendor to be like, hey, so this is how they're using this. This is how I need to get you to, get your tool in their workflow. How are you going to help me achieve this outcome? So that's kind of the shift. So if I were to break it down, you have to upskill yourself in all of these AI tools. Two, you have to kind of bring the vendor along on the journey. And part of this boils down to, I've seen teams, I haven't had to do it with my vendors, but I've seen teams switch vendors when a vendor can't keep up with this pace of technology, being open to going with more AI native vendors. And I will say the vendors teach us a lot. So we had a session with Clay actually where they brought to our teams this 8-step method on how to prompt engineer better. And it was so well attended. Like a ton of the organization came and learned, and that helped me learn as well. And every day these AI native companies are teaching me. I'll have vendors that are like, oh, you need to set up hot buttons. Nobody in your org is going to go and like prompt it in this one specific way. So kind of a hodgepodge of different things that are happening. But I think upskilling is the biggest one, and then bringing the vendor along in the journey with you. And then finally figuring out what is the flow, the agentic flow that your end users are already doing, and then incorporating yourself into that instead of, slapping another, oh, go to this tool for that one piece of your flow.
There are so many things I want to ask you with this. I have to start somewhere, but yeah, that's fascinating. And then we could encapsulate all of this into change management. Like it's such
Yeah.
a change that's happening, like it or not. AI is here. Embrace it. Yes, let's go. Do not embrace it. We are afraid. Okay, that's another answer. And then in those answers, there are so many layers and so many flavors of that. And yeah, in your case, of course, we would expect this from NVIDIA to be more like, yes, embrace it. Yes, of course. But then how? And as you said, so many stakeholders, so many people, so many visions. And you said a lot of things. And I will start with this because I think to any leader listening to this, they would be curious on how you manage this and how our NVIDIA handles this as well. It's like, okay, there are a bunch of tools, Claude and Codex leading, obviously. But there is this question of data and data privacy and security, and you don't want any breach and anything like this. And I've been working in IT teams quite a lot. I know those guys. They're not easy. The first answer they say, at least in France, the first answer they say is no, whatever you ask. And then they look into the details and see what they can do to help you. With such a policy like, okay, we embrace AI, of course. Here are the tools. Do stuff with that. How does the IT team for you and your relationship with them handle this? Because it's a crucial matter and nobody has a proper answer, I would say, so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I think here is a strength that you can kind of bring to the table as an ops person. Working closely with IT has been my entire career, right? And I think IT has a hard job. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. Super tough.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Security,
yeah.
I think also, cybersecurity in this era, not an easy job. I would say it took time. It took over a year building relationships, and then you have turnover. So I'm in that process again, right, where I'm rebuilding those relationships. And what I try to remind myself is every email, every interaction is an opportunity to, see this person as a human, not an AI bot, right? And so for me, it's a lot about the interpersonal. Like if someone is doing a particularly great job, like I've had my leader reach out to their leader and be like, hey, so-and-so really helped me get this across the board. So just making sure that my reputation in this very large org is somebody who values the work and makes sure that if she's helped, she pays it forward. And so making sure that whatever you can do to not get upset, no matter how long it's taking, no matter how many times you submitted the same ticket, you should maintain your kind and friendly and helpful demeanor. At the same
We're
time,
still humans.
right, we're still humans. At the same time, I think it's part of the org you're in. Our leadership from the top is pushing that, hey, you can't delay this stuff. You have to get it done. Also, the IT leaders ask for feedback, and I take time to go and then give that feedback, and they can look back and see that, oh, all these tickets are correct. It did take over a year to get this one thing through security, and it's still not deployed. And I can kind of like show that track record. Like I'm documenting, I'm keeping track, and without frustration, but just kind of like matter of factly, like, hey, I haven't been able to get this done for over a year, and this is a problem. Can't take this long, right? So I think that's where I've maintain this Buddhist stoic Zen type thing. Like no matter how bad it gets, no matter how long it takes, I'm going to stay chill because we're all just trying to do our jobs. And I don't know what's on my IT team's plate. I don't know what their leadership is having to do. So it's hard. It's not easy. And it's particularly hard when you're in a very large or with a lot of people asking for stuff. So don't have any perfect answers, but I think just keep at it. And then if you can make some friends in the department and kind of run things as a project, that's the other thing. Like I've pushed for like weekly meetings where I can follow up with people instead of just like always commenting on a ticket and then waiting just to be able to show and tell, because then I can be like, hey, I'm going to share my screen. You can see this is what I'm trying to achieve. Do you understand now? So that's kind of how my approach has been.
Yeah, I like that. And in the end, I mean, that has been quite a long time that I haven't been inside a company with an IT team, but I'm dealing with IT teams for prospect and clients quite a lot. And they are also humans. They also have responsibilities. They also have tasks on their plate. They have to prioritize stuff. So yeah, that's definitely a good advice to see the human behind the ticket, I would say.
Yep. Yeah.
And I would say the next question, which is once you have solved this IT matter, this technical question, the next step is adoption. And you obviously, Vish, you said it, you were like, okay, I'm taking care of my kid. And once everything is done, I'm going to look into those tools and try stuff and install them on my laptop and try it for myself. But I'm guessing, even if NVIDIA is obviously a tech-oriented company and everybody loves AI inside this company, I'm sure. But still, there are probably nuance in the ways that people are willing to change and modify the way they work and accept that some of these tasks that we were mentioning before, like they were known to do that, now they have to let it go and basically do the new way using the new tools. How do you manage the adoption, the challenge of adoption with what's in your control, of course, and how is it in general happening in such a company like NVIDIA?
Yeah, so I manage a pretty robust stack, and some tools are very easy. I'll call out LinkedIn. Everybody wants it. I don't need to worry about people wanting to get a Zoom info license or a LinkedIn license. They immediately see the value, right? I think for me, the biggest challenge has been driving a process adoption, a change to the way of doing business, right? And the advice that I receive when I talk to somebody who like leads a very large team and has been here for many, many years, to me, she was like, Vish, just make it simple. Make it as simple as possible to the point where people are just pressing a button and it's getting done. And I think for me, in the beginning, I was like, wow, this technology is like so cool. It can do so much. And people were like, well, we're already using like Perplexity. Why aren't you just getting your tool inside of Perplexity? And I was like, oh, well, like the MCP doesn't exist yet in this tool. And they don't want to hear it. They don't care. Like they just want you to like not tell them that they have to do another step when they're already trying to do like 500 steps, right? And so then I started to take a different approach where I'm like, okay, you know what? You show me what you're doing. And you can kind of quickly pick up people who are really good at their jobs and you can see like what they're doing. And then you're like, oh, okay, so I'm just going to try to get my stuff to work in this person's stuff. And then if they adopt it, it's just going to get adopted. You kind of figure that out over time. Like who are the people that are the champions within their org? Who are like kind of those leaders in that group, like in that little social group that you really need to win over. So if you win them over, then everyone's going to kind of get won over, right? So I think trying to figure that out. Also being open to feedback. And I still get feedback all the time. I'll roll out something. And for me, adoption is part of the problem, but also like token optimization and credit usage. I'll roll out something to someone and they have amazing results. I'll roll out the exact same thing to someone else and they have terrible results or, just not as good. And then they won't be like, oh, they won't necessarily go and look at the person that had great results and see, oh, how can I self-improve? And you also don't want to have that awkward conversation like, well, this person did all these things. You didn't do all those things, right? It's instead it's like, oh, let me bring the learnings. My shared goal is I want everyone to be successful and adopt this technology, right? So I think, this is age old and also something you bring from your ops life, right, is identify the influencers and champions within one group and then just kind of be really good friends with them and make them successful so that they can then go and help you drive that adoption.
That's That's interesting. You reverse engineer the thing. Like instead of saying like, okay, this is the most capable tool for this output we want, you're more like, okay, how does this guy do the thing? Okay, it's using those steps and maybe we can fit those tools or maybe tweak it a little so it fits their processes. So you bring the tools to them instead of bringing them to the tool.
Yeah, meet the seller where they're at.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I like it. You just need, as you said, probably that's why you're targeting the champion for each teams or categories. Otherwise, you would have like maybe 10 ways to do something, and you're like, okay, I can't be that custom. I can't have 10 variation of the thing. You have to centralize and have some tools that are doing this. That's it. So you bring the leader of this group, and that's the new norm, sort of.
Yeah, and it might not even, it might not be the person that's given that leader title. You just kind of can see when you're
Mm.
interacting with teams, right? And some of this it's harder to do when it's virtual, right? But when you're in a group setting, you kind of see who has influence, who do people listen to, right? And just that's the other time when you can like use your humanity to understand other humans and get them to adopt AI.
I was about to say that. That's once
Yeah.
more humans relationships that are making the difference with both IT and the team to adapt the change, the tools.
Yeah.
That's a good lesson here, I think. That brings me to this, I would say, the third layer of this same problem, which is adopting AI in an organization. You mentioned it as well, and I find it fascinating. That's the vendors themselves, the tools themselves, which maybe might be the most capable or the one we are used to use for X, Y, and Z. But if, as you said, they do not interconnect, which I think I need to do an episode dedicated to this topic because it's like such a big challenge. Like how much as a SaaS provider, as a tool provider, how much do you open your tool to the external world so an agent can play around within the tool? How much do you want to be protective of it? Where's the limit? Where's the cursor? I think it's such a wide topic. But from the user side, the buyer side, which is where you are, that's a no-brainer anymore. Like that's a go, no-go criteria. Do you open this to be integrated in our system? Yes, you can come in. No, you're out. Is that
Yeah, like if a
strict?
tool, if I notice that a vendor doesn't have MCP on their roadmap, or if they're not like working with me to go do it, I actually have been very lucky. All of the tools I manage, everyone's pretty forward thinking. Even in those early days where I kind of felt like I was talking crazy, you'd meet little like people within the org that would eventually find me and be like, "Hey, like you should talk to our product person because it seems like customers like you." And I think this is where, had I been at one of the smaller companies I worked at, maybe people wouldn't have taken me so seriously. But with the NVIDIA name, at least, it has been like where the vendors take you quite seriously and they are willing to partner with you. So I'm lucky in that way. But yes, like if you're in a smaller company and you're newer in the world or you're trying to learn, I think you want to go with the vendors that are AI native. Look at their customer list, look at what things they have on their roadmap. Can they give you actual dates for when they're going to get things like an MCP done? But yeah, in this day and age, if in the next 6-7 months they're not going to go and try to have an MCP connector, do I want to onboard the vendor? For right now, at least my answer is no. And I can't predict the future. Maybe MCP will be completely dead, 2 years from now, and I'll look back at this episode and be like, oh my God, what was I thinking? But for now, like this is
I'm not
this
so
is
sure.
where this is the
Yeah.
vision I've been marching towards for over a year now. And I told my vendors actually in those days when I was coming back and I was so overwhelmed with my personal, having a newborn and then also my work life, I had a very limited, like, I was going to get what I can get done in my 8 hours and then maybe a couple hours after the kid was asleep. But I had to get it done and I didn't want to prioritize. And my manager was supportive of this. It's like, I'm just going to prioritize the people who have the stuff. And if you don't have the stuff and you have no plan to get the stuff, I'm just not going to prioritize the projects that are with your vendor until you have this up and running. And I think I probably wasn't, the favorite customer of a few of these vendors, but I definitely, I got some things really quickly rolled out. And I think that's a big part of it. It's also another thing you didn't ask me, but I'll share anyways, is, for me,
Please.
it's a matter of being able to learn, like, how can I maximize my learnings? If you have an AI native vendor who's comfortable with you, right, they can call you out. And I've had vendors tell me like, yeah, so your approach to this, maybe not the best. Like we work with thousands of customers like you, and this is what the most successful ones have done. Maybe you should do it that way instead. And I'm very open to that feedback. I want them to tell me that. I want them to go and make connections for me and introduce me to the people that are doing it right. And I'm sure you yourself, you're probably interacting with so many people and you see who fails and who survives quite quickly. So I think that's the advantage of working with vendors that are ahead or staying ahead.
That's such a great point. You want this feedback to learn, and you can't know everything. You can know what's in your scope, but then having some external advice. And once more, I like the way you presented it. Like, we have some data and we can share it with you to help you understand more what's happening. A great example of human relationship and, and taking care of the ego of the human in front of you. But even at my, I'm a smaller level, much smaller, obviously, than NVIDIA. I'm like you. I'm like, okay, guys, and I would say I don't have the power to be patient. I can't just say, hey, what's your roadmap? They don't really care. I don't have this weight that NVIDIA can have. So I'm almost forced to be like, guys, I like you. I like your tool. But if you don't have an MCP like soon, I'll go with this one, which is maybe a bit less efficient, but that is connected to my entire system. Because of course now everything goes through my agents and the AI tools that we are using every day. So yeah, for sure. Getting back a little more to your core activity, which is marketing, how do we make sure, and this is a hot topic right now while we are recording, that the content, that the marketing initiative stays as human as possible to talk to human? When we sit on LinkedIn, I'm spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, and we see this AI generated content everywhere, which is less and less human. How do you manage this on your side with your marketing team and marketing ops to keep things more authentic while leveraging the tools to be more efficient when producing?
Yeah, so I'm going to say something that might go against the grain. We actually don't have yet. We are working on it, but we don't have like an AI SDR live today, right? So all of the emails and things that I've enabled via Clay are going through a human at the end of the day. And there's a human verification step where they check every email before they hit send. Now, when I told you earlier, I had like pulled together a target list and I had done all this research, right? I said, hey, look for like these types of hiring signals, look for these type of products, coalesce that into a summary, parlay that against, the solutions that we have, and then create a compelling message, right? And then it came up with this basically like summary, right? And I played around with the different models. I found a model that actually made it sound more human, right? But there's a couple different ways that we've approached this. One, you can like go through and you can actually scrape people's posts on social media and see, okay, what is this person posted about? And let me reference that, right? And that even though AI has done it, and probably even like as a reader, AI has done it, somebody has taken the time to think through that flow, right? So that's one way you can do that outreach. I have other people where they're actually still to this day, they're like, we just want the research from, these tools you have, but we're going to write our own emails because we want to keep it human. And I will say, I saw like a 12% open and response rate for the rep that like hand wrote their emails, but they did some really compelling research. They saw that that person had published a paper. They followed up about that one specific paper. So using the tool to go and do things like, hey, like go find me this person's paper, and then actually going and reading the paper or like getting the summary and then referencing, like, that's so flattering, like that somebody has gone and read your research paper, which is probably so dense, and then is reaching out to you about it, right? So that's one example. That's like some of the stuff that I see our team actively doing. I think there's a lot of potential, and I don't today, work with our campaign marketing teams, but I get a lot of stuff. And so I recently had a couple of very interesting personalized email things sent to me. Actually, I'll tell you what Clay did for me as a vendor. For my birthday, they knew a restaurant that I really liked, and they sent me a gift card to that restaurant to, take for a future date for me to go and eat there. And I was like, wow, like that's a really good vendor, like, and like building that relationship again, like they're still best in class, and I would evaluate other tools if they weren't, but like
That's
that element
that's
is
very
very
much a Clay
helpful.
thing to do. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And so you see, these companies are really good at doing it. And I'm hoping that I would love the chance to work with some of the teams that do more of that kind of marketing here, because I think there's a lot of potential to do that kind of stuff with AI now, where you can actually go, and I mentioned it earlier, look at your overlapping population. And maybe you can't send a free DGX or a GPU to every customer, but maybe you can figure out what they like and send them something that's a little bit more cost effective to get them to then have that conversation about GPUs with you.
Yeah, maybe not a GPU, indeed.
Yeah.
That would have a huge impact for sure, but cost effective, as you said. Or
Yeah.
maybe you have to very, very like a narrow segment of your targeting. Maybe. But yeah, that's very interesting. In the end, that's what I'm preaching every day. So I definitely agree with you. Like you want to automate and delegate to AI the boring and tedious task, but keep the human touch and delegate the search, but using the search to do the sequence and the outreach. Makes total sense. I would say the next question regarding this is, okay, once they have adopted the tools, let's say Clay and some of those AI, let's say Claude and the models that are everywhere. Once they have adopted it, how do you manage each one of your team members as individuals where they want to put the cursor? Do you impose like, okay, guys, in the team, we should do research is automated, but you do the email? Or, okay, Michael, you can do up to sending 2 emails if you like, and you, John, you do this because you prefer to do it manually. How do you manage those differences?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I found very refreshing is the level of autonomy that NVIDIA gives you. If you want to do something and you have an idea, though everyone will back you up and you figure it out, right? So the way that we've got our sales stream structured is you're in charge of your vertical. At the end of the day, we call our sales development reps like an SDS, right? It's up to you how you want to approach it, right? We will offer the same thing, which is for right now, mass emails for the one industry you have. Now, I am running into a lot of problems scaling this like very niche approach, right? And try to think through, okay, how am I going to now design a more broad ICP that's maybe always on? And then maybe I can only offer 5 custom, and it's up to the sales leaders to decide what industries need that 5 custom extra help, right? And so then the leaders have to figure out which reps really need it or which areas of the business are really suffering. And then you go and do that custom work. So that level of scale, we're still figuring it out. But at the end of the day, I think it is really up to the individual users. I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago and I was working with the reps there. And for them, it's like a whole language thing too, right? So then there, every single email has to be vetted by a human to make sure that the language is also correct, right? But they're all taking different approaches too, right? So some want to go after like the C-level verticals, some after the practitioner. And my approach has kind of been like, you know your region, you know your language, you know that industry way better than I do. So you make the decision. But then, yeah, we do run into massive challenges with scaling because our team runs lean. Right now, I'm the only person that's really in charge of Clay. Well, we have some folks that have been kind enough to be, on loan from other teams to me to get this off the ground, and they're co-building with me. But we're still figuring out that scale in this world. And maybe you don't even need scale. When I was leaving my job at Databricks a few years ago, I had somebody in a pretty senior position show me the data that if you go and send a very compelling message to a specific user that is in the product, is in the ecosystem and database, and you just only send 20 emails instead of 2,000, you'll actually see the same response rates and conversions and things like that. And if you can drive the same amount of pipeline with less, do less, right? Maybe less is more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's to go in that direction with you. And I have a question that I save for just after. But yes, I've been personally always convinced that even the message could be averaged. I mean, the copy could be average if it's relevant, well-researched, and you're touching the point, the hottest point for them right now. They will be interested to respond to you, even if it's not perfect copy and not respecting the best approach, like driving curiosity or whatever. So 100%. And the second element to go with you on this is that I recently interviewed Charles Steno, who is the CEO at Lemlist. So it's one of the main email sequencer on the market. And he was looking at the data. I asked him the question, like, what is your data from your customers sending loads of emails every day? He's saying, and he said exactly that, like the top 10% is sending actually less volume than the rest because they are doing more research and they are being more relevant and they have better reply rates and conversion rates. So it's not just, a feeling, and what you've seen at Databricks was just an example of this. It's the data saying like based on 20,000 customers sending millions of email every month, that's the output. Doesn't mean that you can't do volume and you need to scale at some point, of course. But still, the more relevance, and it makes sense when we receive emails anyway. We don't want to be like, okay, this is completely out of what I'm doing. Sometimes I receive emails, I'm like, guys,
yeah, the vast majority of emails ignore delete, right? That's what happens.
So many people are trying to sell me Clay or helping me create content on LinkedIn, which are like 2 of the things I do the most on a daily basis. So yeah, you didn't do your research in that case. I had this question about something you said. You mentioned, and I think it's not an isolated case. I've seen this many times, I've heard this many times, and not only for AI, but also for many type of initiatives. You have this thing, as a leader and your top management, you said it is like, yes, we want to go AI. And of course, NVIDIA, that makes sense. But at the same time, you said like, you're kind of the only one in charge of this for the GTM department, I guess, and having some help from people because they are excited about it, not really because that's part of their mission and they're doing this on top of it. I guess the question is like, when you have already processes that are working and you have to deliver, how do you squeeze change management, research, education, all of those things that are required to implement a new way of working, a new technology, without investing heavily, like, I don't know, hiring an AI team dedicated to that, like, which nobody does. Or maybe it's changing. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I'll speak from it personally, and then I'll speak from a team perspective. I don't manage a team here at NVIDIA, but I have managed teams in the past. And I would say for me, myself personally, there is nothing like ruthless prioritization. I think I've gotten better at it the older I've gotten, and just you don't have a choice once you have a kid. Like if they're sick, that's your whole day. So just being ruthless, and I think through like, okay, where can I drive the most business impact? So I think about it from terms of like, okay, what is going to generate the most revenue, the most meetings? What are the metrics that will matter the most to my leadership? And what tasks can I do that will help me achieve that? And everything else, it maybe doesn't need to be a priority. And then, earlier I'd like go and ask permission or ask somebody to prioritize for me. Now I'll be like, nope, this is what I'm prioritizing. By the way, just so you know, this is what I'm going to do. And I really haven't had a ton of pushback. Like maybe there's like, okay, but I really need you to also do this, and we'll have that conversation. But for yourself, being able to ruthlessly prioritize, I think is the biggest muscle that you could develop in your career. It's been life-changing for me to be able to learn to figure out what's important, what's not important, and how do you say, I'll get to it later. Maybe you don't say no, but you say, I'll get to it later. This is what I'm going to get to right now, and here's why. So that is how I prioritize for myself. For your team, I think and I've been influential here too. It's like, you got to write down everything everyone has to do, right? As a leader. And when you're at small companies, a lot of times it seems like very silly to go and take the time to go and do that, because that takes away from the work. But you have to figure out what is it that your team is actually doing. And I saw, in my past lives, I've had so many managers come in and out, and they were always so confused. And it was really a documentation problem. Like, you need to figure out what the team's working on, how much of that time is taking them, and then t-shirt size it, right? Like, okay, why does one person have these 5 really big projects, and then this one person is just doing little tasks, which is like everything's getting done, but like this person has no career development, and this person is drowning, right, in these massive projects. So having that visibility, t-shirt sizing it, and then kind of like developing your own internal team roadmap. Like, hey, this is like the mission and vision of my team. These are the things we're going to do. You might want to bake in some, buffer so that your team can work on things as they come up. But I think that's kind of how, as a leader, like the best leaders I know have really supported me and prioritizing my work, and then they've prioritized the work for the team and been very okay either letting me tell my stakeholders, here's why I'm not going to do this right now, or gone and been that advocate for me, be like, here's why this is not going to get done right now. And if you're in a healthy, non-toxic org, that typically works. I've definitely seen the flip side of it where you get penalized, but that's, maybe a signal not to stay in that org. But yeah.
Maybe a good signal indeed. That's very insightful, and that goes back to what we were saying and you were saying before. It's again the humans in the organization that are important for that. Vish, thank you very much. That was very insightful. I appreciate you joining this episode. That was the first one. I've learned a lot, and I hope the audience will as well. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you as well. Thank you.